In a world of noise, bias, and spin, intelligence may be the only currency that matters. Welcome to This Week Explained. I'm Tiana, and as always, I am joined by 20-plus year intelligence veteran Kervin. We go behind the front lines to bring you the factual, actual intelligence that you need. No fluff, no agenda, because we value the truth and your time. Before we start, I want you to know this broadcast is powered by the Leon Media Network. From sports to education, find your next obsession, like Can We Please Talk? Or At Least You Heard It Here at leonmedianetwork.com. We are also caffeinated through those late nights of intelligence reporting by fresh roasted coffee. They've set up a special offer just for our listeners. To get the best deal, you must click the link in our show notes and enter the code THISWEEK. That's THISWEEK to get 20% off your first order. It's genuinely some of the best coffee you can buy, and you'll be supporting the show, so check that out. Now, are you guys ready for the real story? Let's get into the update. This week, we are watching two completely different realities play out simultaneously. The dissonance is not just jarring, it is becoming the defining feature of the global landscape. On one screen, we have diplomats in Florida discussing security frameworks and deterrence. On the other, Moscow is unleashing the most intense aerial bombardment seen in months, explicitly shaping the battlefield to prove that regardless of what happens in a conference room, they still possess the physical capability to turn the lights off and weaponize the cold. In Gaza, the pivot to the second phase of the peace plan is colliding with the hard reality of the yellow line. The assassination of Hamas's weapons chief has jeopardized the ceasefire, while the U.S. effort to build an International Stabilization Force is stalling as allies refuse to cross into the red zone, forcing Washington to consider a command structure that looks dangerously like owning the conflict. And in Central Africa, the humiliation of American diplomacy is on full display. An historic peace deal signed in Washington evaporated in less than a week as proxy forces captured the strategic hub of Uvira, effectively telling the White House that you cannot make peace on paper while ignoring the power dynamics in the jungle. From the collapsing truces in Southeast Asia to the construction of Pax Silica to ring-fence the future of AI, the board is being reset. In this episode, we dissect the gap between the peace being promised and the wars actually being fought. Okay, it is certainly a heavy morning here, and I know we usually try to ease into things, but the news cycle out of Eastern Europe the last 2 weeks has been relentless. By the way, we apologize for not releasing an episode last week. We were trying to shift to a different day of release, and we definitely underestimated how busy our schedules actually are during the week.
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to be sticking to the Monday morning release date until our time zones converge.
Okay, so on one screen, you have diplomats in Florida shaking hands and talking about frameworks. On the other screen, you have perhaps the most intense aerial bombardment that we have seen in months. And that is exactly where I want to start. The dissonance is jarring. While Ukrainian officials were in Florida last week, Russia unleashed a massive barrage, hundreds of drones and missiles. We are seeing reports of air raid sirens across the entire country. So, what is the strategic logic here? Is this just standard intimidation, or is there like a specific message that Russia is sending to those negotiators in Florida?
Well, good morning, Tiana. Yeah, it's quite a lot to unpack here early this morning for you. And for Russia, look, all of this is rarely just an intimidation. This is what we would call shaping the battlefield, right? To shape the negotiation table. Now, the timing's not coincidental. So, by targeting energy infrastructure, the rail hubs, right as talks are heating up in Florida over the past 2 weeks, I think Moscow is demonstrating leverage here. They are effectively saying that regardless of what is discussed in conference rooms in the United States, they still possess the physical capability to turn the lights off and freeze the population of Ukraine. So this is a reminder of the cost of continuing this war.
And they are targeting the energy grid again. We were hearing about blackouts in 8 regions, but there was also an alarming note about the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant losing external power. I feel like we have reported on that plant losing power a dozen times. So, how close are we to that becoming a catastrophic failure?
Yeah, look, we're at 11 times now. And while the reactors are in shutdown, I think people tend to forget that you still need electricity to cool the fuel. And when the external lines are cut, the plant has to actually rely on diesel generators. So it is in a precarious position right now. The International Atomic Energy Agency is sounding the alarm, but the plant is currently being used as a pawn by Russia. Now, Russia controls it, but the instability of the power grid is what threatens it. And it serves as a very dangerous lever for Moscow to create urgency in the international community. That way, Russia can then force a settlement on their terms.
So, basically, Russia is weaponizing anxiety.
Yeah, absolutely. In the age of of anxiety, right? They're also weaponizing the cold during the winter months. Once again, we're heading into the fourth winter of this war. And so, by continuing to degrade the grid as they are now, Russia is trying to degrade the civilian will to fight.
All right, so let's pivot to the ground war because the narrative there is just as contested. Vladimir Putin declared that Russia has captured Pokrovsk, but at what cost? We are looking at numbers that suggest Russia lost an immense amount of armor and personnel to take these few miles.
Yeah, and the attrition rates are staggering here. We're looking at estimates over 100, over 1,000 armored vehicles that were lost in this sector alone. Is what typically analysts will refer to as a pirate victory. Russia is trading strategic assets, the men that they have, and the material to fight this war for tactical gains. However, and I think this is really the important part, Tiana, the Russian military is adapting. They're realizing they were losing too many tanks to Ukrainian drones, so they shifted tactics.
Shifted how?
Well, they moved away from big mechanized assaults. Instead, they are using small infantry groups to infiltrate the battlefield. So they send wave after wave of foot soldiers, supported by their own drones, to cut off Ukrainian supplies. And it's slow, it's bloody, and it actually results in high casualties. Some reports say 25,000 troops lost in October alone. But it is working because it is inching the line forward.
That sounds terrifyingly sustainable for a country with a larger population, but unsustainable for a modern military.
Well, it's sustainable only as long as the political will in Moscow accepts the body count. But for Ukraine, the problem is the template. If Russia can replicate this model using drones to starve a town of supplies and then overwhelming it with infantry, they may get Kyiv to concede territory.
Which brings us back to the diplomatic track. We have this grinding, bloody reality on the ground, and then we have the talks in Florida. We heard that the Ukrainian delegation, including officials from their National Security Council, met with President Trump's advisors. They called the talks constructive, but is there any actual overlap between what is happening in the trenches and what is being proposed in these meetings?
Look, I think there's a significant gap here. The Florida talks are discussing security frameworks and deterrence, but the reality is you generally do not see a cessation of hostilities when one side believes they're winning, or at least one side believes they're advancing. The Kremlin has stated there is no compromise on their demands, and Putin is even demanding a full Ukrainian withdrawal from the Donbass region as a precondition.
Which, of course, is a non starter for Kiev.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is why the European leaders are scrambling. So we saw that President Macron went to London to meet with the British and German leadership. There's a palpable anxiety in Europe that the United States is going to pivot or that a peace deal might be forced upon Ukraine that leaves them vulnerable. So they are trying to coordinate a unified stance to keep pressure on Moscow.
It feels like a race, does it not? Like a race between the Russian military trying to seize as much ground as possible before any potential freeze, and the Western allies trying to figure out what security guarantees they can actually offer.
Yeah, that is a fair assessment. Ukraine is trying to hold the line and strike back against Russian revenue sources. We saw tanker strikes this week. We saw the week before other strikes on Russian revenue sources. This is all in an attempt to make the war too expensive for Moscow. Now, Russia is trying to break the Ukrainian grid and morale before Western aid or the Ukrainian resolve shifts. And the diplomats are trying to find a piece of paper that can bridge those two violent realities. But as long as Russia is making gains, however slow and costly they are, their incentive to stop is very low.
So, those constructive talks in Florida are perhaps more about setting the table for the future rather than ending the war tomorrow.
Yeah, exactly. So you can't have diplomatic breakthrough without a stabilization of the front line. So until Ukraine can stop the Russian advance cold, likely requiring better drone countermeasures and more conventional artillery, the diplomacy will struggle to gain traction.
A sobering reality check, as always. So, for now, let's shift the focus to Gaza, and we have a lot to unpack here. It has been a very heavy week, even by the standards of the last 2 years. We are looking at a potential flashpoint in Gaza regarding the ceasefire and simultaneously a massive, somewhat chaotic diplomatic push by the United States to figure out who exactly is going to secure the strip once the dust settles.
Right, that's the classic problem of winning the war versus winning the peace. We saw this kind of the downfall of the U.S. in Iraq and Afghanistan, and right now it looks like we are struggling to define what peace even looks like.
All right, then let's start with the immediate news. We had reports coming out of Gaza City this week regarding a high profile airstrike. So, what do we know?
Yeah, and look, it is confirmed now. Rod Saad was killed. He was killed while driving along the Rashid coastal road in Gaza City.
And for our listeners who might not track the organizational charts as closely as you do, where did he fit into the hierarchy?
So Rod Saad, he was the chief of Hamas's weapons manufacturing headquarters. So in terms of the military structure, he was considered number two, right behind Is al-Din Haddad. Eliminating him is a major operational success for the Israelis, but it comes at a very high geopolitical cost.
Because of the timing, right?
Yeah, exactly. Now, the strike is being viewed as an apparent violation of the current ceasefire. Perhaps just as telling is the communication breakdown. So, according to reports, the Israelis actually did not inform the United States in advance of this strike.
Which suggests a widening gap between Israeli operational decisions and American diplomatic strategy. And that leads us directly into the broader topic we wanted to discuss today. The United States is trying to pivot to the second phase of the Trump peace plan, but the ground beneath them is shaking. We're talking about the International Stabilization Force, or ISF.
Yeah, the ISF. This is intended to be the mechanism that allows the IDF to withdraw from Gaza. Now, the concept is that an international coalition takes over the security for the region, but the gap between the plan on paper and the reality in the briefing rooms is rather stark.
That seems to be the case for all these conflicts. The gap between the plan on paper and the reality is stark.
Yeah.
The numbers do not look promising. The State Department sent requests to over 70 countries asking for troops or funding. So, how is the recruitment drive going?
Well, let me start by saying I'm glad they sent it over in Times New Roman and not that DEI Calibri style.
Oh my gosh,
in the
I'm
previous
so grateful
administration.
we're back to Times New Roman.
Yes.
That seems like a very important distinction.
I have tons that I could say about that privately, so I'll keep that private.
You better tell me eventually at some point.
Oh, I just mean like my opinions on the stupidity of it, which I'm now saying publicly on
Every
here.
teeny tiny little decision they make, they release it in the press like it's amazing. It's just wild to me. Every little thing that any of these people do, it's released to the press with, well, fanfare from them, not anybody else. Everybody else is like, "We have big problems here. We don't care."
Yeah, and I mean, this is one of my pet peeves in the intelligence community. Of hey, it was standardized the text. Everyone used the same style text, as if that is what drives the intelligence, and not the analyst. Like if you could see inside the mind of the analyst, it's text all over the place in different colors and different fonts, and just absolutely chaotic. Um, so I don't get the standardization there, but that's above my pay grade. You were asking about how the recruitment drive is going.
Oh, yeah,
And
sorry. We you said you didn't wanna talk about it, and then we talked about it.
yeah, I spent too much time on that. So back to it. I would say the recruitment drive is going slowly. There's a U.S. official that indicated that only 19 of those 70 requests have responded with a willingness to assist. So we saw European powers like France and Italy being approached, along with smaller nations like El Salvador, also Malta. They reached out to Malta, but willingness to do it is not, in fact, deployment of those peacekeepers.
Do you think that has if people's lack of trust in this administration, like all the other countries' lack of trust in the American administration, the current one?
I think there's something to be said about that. This is something as the Trump administration was coming back into power, where there was a lot of thought about how is the Indo-Pacific going to deal with that, because if there's a lack of trust with the administration, are they going to are they going to decide to just go at China by themselves and just tell the US to stay out of it? Are we going to lose our partners in the Indo-Pacific? Are we going to lose our partners in Europe? And I think some of that is the trust there. So yeah, you make a good point.
Okay, well, I saw reports that Indonesia was putting a large number on the table.
Yeah, they are. Indonesia has mentioned up to 20,000 troops, but and there's always a but here, but they specified these are going to be for health and construction tasks, not peacekeeping. So they're not looking to be the tip of the spear in Gaza.
And besides these countries' lack of trust in the current administration, this seems to be the crux of the hesitation for everybody. I mean, it's not just about sending troops, it's about where they go. There's this talk of a yellow line. So, can you break that down?
Oh yeah, absolutely. You're spot on there. And it's a critical friction point. The Gaza Strip is effectively divided. Now, the IDF controls roughly 53% of the territory, and this is what they call the area behind the yellow line. The countries in talks with the US are stipulating that they're only going to deploy to behind the yellow line. That should tell you how they feel about the security of the region, because they only want to be within the Israeli controlled zones.
So, they want a buffer for their soldiers.
Yeah, they want safety. They do not want to be in the red zone, which is the area that's still controlled by Hamas. Now, the United States is pushing for the ISF to operate in those Hamas controlled areas to actually take over the security there. So, right now we have this stalemate. The potential contributors are saying, we're only going to go where it's safe. And the US is saying, well, we need you where it's dangerous.
Well, that danger is predicated on whether Hamas is actually going to disarm.
Yeah, another great point. Look, if Hamas is disarmed, is it now a red zone, right? And Hamas has publicly stated they will not disarm until a Palestinian state is established. but intelligence channels suggest that there is a more nuanced reality here. We're seeing more reports. We did this a few weeks ago, if you remember, that Hamas had been quietly informing Egypt they might be willing to decommission heavy weapons under Cairo's supervision. But heavy weapons is a specific category. It does not mean total disarmament.
So we have a force that is struggling to form, a designated zone that nobody wants to patrol, and an adversary that is sending mixed signals about its weapons. Into this vacuum steps the United States. We are hearing about a new command structure.
Yeah, and this is a major shift in policy, even if the White House is framing it carefully here. They're planning to appoint an American two-star general to command the ISF.
But the White House keeps stressing no U.S. boots on the ground.
Well, yeah, that's the public political line. The operational reality is that if an American general is in command, the U.S. owns the responsibility. This turns the Gaza reconstruction and security mission into the largest U.S. project in the Middle East in 2 decades.
And also, if a U.S. general is in command, those are U.S. boots on the ground.
Yes, even if it's one, right?
Even if it's
U.S.
one
general,
person.
and it's just him.
Mhm.
U.S. boots on the
Or on the
ground.
ground. Okay. So, well, it looks like we will have to see what comes out of negotiations in Doha. It seems like the architecture is being built while the ground is still shifting. Now, we are going to put a pin in the Middle East for just a moment and shift our focus to Central Africa. But before we dive into that, let's be real for a second. The news cycle right now is absolutely relentless. And if you are like us, you aren't looking for more headlines, you are looking for clarity. You're trying to spot the signal and all that noise without burning out. This is why ground news is such a vital partner for us. We aren't just reading a script here. This is a tool we rely on daily to navigate the chaos. We genuinely respect their mission. We specifically recommend the Vantage subscription so you can see the full spectrum of media bias. And right now, you can get 40% off by using our link. If you want to support the show and, frankly, just get smarter about how you consume information, go check it out. It's a great way to take advantage of the deal. The link is waiting for you in the show notes, or you can navigate to our Instagram. It's right there in the bio. Now, as we mentioned before, we are moving our focus to Central Africa. It is a region being discussed quite a bit over the last few months, mostly because the timing of recent events. So, let's set the scene for everybody. You have the President of the United States, Donald Trump, in Washington. He is flanked by the President of the Democratic Republic of Congo and the President of Rwanda. They signed this massive, historic peace deal. Handshakes, photo ops, the works. And then, less than a week later, the M23 rebel group captures Uvira, a critical city in eastern Congo. The deal seems to have evaporated before the ink was even dry.
It effectively has. And Tiana, this is not just a skirmish in the jungle. The capture of Uvira is a strategic game changer. Take out Google Maps, everybody. When you look at that map, Uvira is not just another city. It is a logistics hub. It sits right at the top of Lake Tanganyika. Losing Uvira means the Congolese government has lost its major foothold in the entire province.
So, help us understand the why here. If you are Rwanda and the United States is accusing Rwanda of backing this offensive, why would you sit in Washington and sign a peace deal on Tuesday only to effectively torch it on Friday?
Yeah, there's a ton of intelligence professionals who are asking the exact same question, Tiana. This is the big question here. You have to look at this through the lens of leverage, though. We know that M23, the rebel group, was not part of that Washington deal. They have been relegated to a separate negotiation track hosted by Qatar, and that has stalled. By taking Uvira right now, the message to Washington and Kinshasa is very clear. You cannot make peace without us.
So, this is a power play.
It is a massive power play. It's actually humiliating for the United States. You have the U.S. ambassador to the UN, Mike Waltz, and Secretary of State Marco Rubio coming out and publicly blaming Rwanda. They are not using diplomatic code words anymore. They are saying quite literally that Kigali, Rwanda's capital, is commanding this war.
And that's a pretty big shift, is it not? Usually these accusations are a bit more vague. Quote, concerned about external actors, end quote, that sort of thing.
Yeah, exactly. But here, the intelligence is pointing to something much more direct. We are seeing reports of 5 to 7,000 Rwandan troops operating inside Congo. We are seeing the use of drone technology that a rebel militia simply would not possess on its own. So the discipline required to break the defensive lines at Uvira suggests state-level military involvement.
So Rwanda is denying this, obviously. They say they aren't involved at all.
Yeah, they do. They deny it categorically. They argue that they are protecting their own borders from hostile groups like the FDLR, and they blame the Congo government for failing to secure the region. But when you look at the capability gap, how fast Uvira fell, and how organized the offensive was, it's very difficult to align that with the ragtag militia acting alone.
Okay, I want to touch on the third player in this drama, which is Burundi. Why does the fall of Uvira matter so much to Burundi?
Yeah, take that. Get back on your Google Maps, everybody. And this is where things get very dangerous. Burundi had thousands of its own troops in eastern Congo, effectively fighting alongside the Congo army against M23. Uvira was their gateway, it was their supply line. It is only about 17 miles from the Burundian capital. That's walking distance in military terms. So by taking Uvira, M23 has cut Burundi off. They have severed that supply line. We're seeing reports that Burundian troops are withdrawing because they are isolated. And this panics Burundi because they have their own rebel enemies, groups like Red Tabara, and that group could use Uvira as a launching pad to attack Burundi directly.
So we are looking at a situation where two neighboring countries, Rwanda and Burundi, are essentially fighting a proxy war that is dangerously close to becoming a direct war.
That is the assessment. The Burundian ambassador said restraint does have its limits, and that is diplomatic speak for we are ready to shoot back. Now, whether Burundi actually has the capacity to wage a full-scale war, that's a topic for another day. Their economy right now is struggling. They have fuel shortages, but desperate actors can make unpredictable choices.
And since we are on the topic of collapsing U.S. brokered peace deals, what is this? War number 20 that Trump ended, which has started up yet again? Good thing he got that peace award from FIFA.
The FIFA Peace Deal, Peace Award.
The first ever FIFA Peace Award, which was so weird. Okay, so obviously,
yeah,
I am talking about the conflict at the border of Thailand and Cambodia. The reporting states this started with a skirmish that killed one Thai soldier, which led to airstrikes. Is an airstrike a proportional response to that, or is there something else driving this decision making?
I mean, in military doctrine, proportionality is subjective, but in diplomatic terms, this is a massive signal. You do not call in air support for a minor border dust up unless you're trying to send a message that reverberates beyond just the battlefield. You have to look at the logistics to understand the intent. The Thai military has evacuated nearly 400,000 civilians from the border provinces.
That number stood out to me as well. 400,000 people. That is not a precautionary measure for a 20-minute gunfight.
Exactly. You don't displace that many people, 70% of the border population, unless you anticipate a sustained engagement. So it tells us that the Thai leadership is clearing the battle space. They're removing civilians to allow for heavier maneuvering or perhaps to brace for significant Cambodian retaliation. This is a grim indicator that they do not expect this to blow over in 24 hours.
And that brings us to the political context, which I know you have been tracking. We cannot view this military action in a vacuum. Thailand has gone through some significant political upheaval recently.
Yeah, like, and it's impossible to separate the two. If you remember, the former prime minister resigned recently. And why? Because of a leaked phone call where she sounded too deferential to the Cambodian leadership. The public backlash was severe.
So the new prime minister is essentially backed into a corner.
Yeah, absolutely. He cannot afford to look weak. If the previous administration fell because they were perceived as too soft on Cambodia, the current administration has to overcorrect. They have to show that they will defend sovereignty aggressively. So, when a soldier is killed, the response cannot just be a diplomatic note of protest. It has to be kinetic, it has to be visible.
It's fascinating how domestic optics can drive international conflict. But back to your earlier point, we had a ceasefire agreement in place. It was brokered by the United States and Malaysia back in October, and it was touted as a major win for President Trump's diplomacy. So, what happened to that?
Yeah, like it's collapsed, and that is the danger here. When you have a diplomatic framework that is less than 2 months old and it disintegrates this quickly, it erodes trust in the mediation process itself, not just in Thailand and Cambodia, but in Palestine, in Ukraine, across the globe. Here, the Thai government had already suspended the agreement earlier due to a landmine incident, but these airstrikes are the final nail in the coffin.
And what about Malaysia? They were heavily involved in that deal.
Yeah, they are calling for restraint, as you would expect. I think the leverage there is gone, though. The Association of Southeast Asian Nations, or ASEAN, prides itself on non interference. But look, this entire conflict threatens regional stability. If two member states are engaging in open combat, it makes economic integration very difficult.
So, looking forward, Kervin, we have airstrikes, we have mass evacuations, and we have a collapsed peace deal. Is there an off ramp here?
Yeah, usually you would look for like a third party mediator to step in. You could see the U.S. come in again. Trump try to strong arm them back into a ceasefire. Maybe China, given their influence in Cambodia, that would be a huge black eye to the United States if China were to broker something here. But look, right now emotions are way too high. The indicators I am watching are the heavy armor movements. So if we see tanks moving to the border, or if Cambodia retaliates against Thai infrastructure rather than just the military targets that they've been targeting, we are looking at a repeat of the July conflict, or worse.
It feels like a situation where both sides have climbed too high up the tree to climb down gracefully. We'll keep monitoring the satellite imagery and the diplomatic cables on this one. It is a developing situation that could have serious ripple effects for the ASEAN bloc. Transitioning now to something that sounds arguably more philosophical but is actually hard nosed economics, Pax Silica. It sounds like a chapter from a history book on the Roman Empire, does it not?
Yeah, it certainly has a ring to it, right? The Peace of Silicon. That's a grand title for what is essentially a massive supply chain reorganization. But the ambition does match the name. We're looking at a fundamental shift in how the United States and its partners view artificial intelligence. This is no longer just a technology. They are treating it like a strategic resource, akin to oil in the 20th century.
So let's break down what this actually is. We have the United States, Japan, South Korea, the Netherlands, the United Kingdom, Israel, the UAE, Singapore, and Australia. That is a very specific list of countries. Why these 9?
Yeah, look, it is a very curated list. So you have your manufacturing giants like Japan and South Korea. You have the Netherlands. They hold the keys to the machines needed to make chips. Then you have Israel and the UK. They're there for research and development. And importantly, you have the UAE and Singapore as logistics and capital hubs. Now, the goal is what they call the strategic stack. They're not just trying to secure computer chips. They're trying to ring fence the entire life cycle of AI, from the critical minerals in the ground to the energy grids to the data centers, and finally the logistics to move it all around. Now, the idea is that if you control every step of the ladder, you reduce your vulnerability to external pressure, specifically pressure from China.
I mean, it all sounds fantastic on paper. We see these summits, like the one in Washington recently, where everyone shakes hands and signs a declaration. Israel's representative called it a mark of distinction. But is this actually operational, or is this just another diplomatic photo opportunity?
That is the right question. There is movement here, though. The State Department has issued directives to embassies to identify specific infrastructure projects, mines, ports, energy grids. That moves this from theory to practice. However, there is a massive but hanging over this entire initiative.
All right, well, let's look at the other side of the Pacific. How is Beijing viewing this Pax Silica summit? We have reports of Chinese analysts calling this a distortion of the International Division of Labor.
Yeah, they are the massive but hanging over this entire initiative, and their reaction is interesting. They're not panicking. Their assessment, and we see this in their state media analysis, is that market forces are on their side. They believe that Western corporate greed will ultimately dismantle Pax Silica.
So they're betting that the profit motive is stronger than the security motive.
That is their wager, and they have leverage here. We can't forget the minerals. China mines or processes about 70% of the world's rare earth elements. You cannot build the high tech batteries, the magnets for EV motors, or the advanced electronics for AI data centers without those inputs. Beijing's strategy is a war of attrition. They know that trying to duplicate their entire supply chain outside of China will raise costs astronomically. Their argument is that eventually Western inflation and corporate lobbying will force the US and its partners to come back to the table. They are waiting for the quote conflict of interests, end quote, to do the work for them.
I have to say, I kind of agree with China here.
I knew you would.
So essentially, this is a game of chicken. The US is betting it can innovate its way around China's monopoly, and China is betting the US cannot afford the price tag of decoupling. One thing that stood out to me in the reports was the inclusion of the UAE. We usually talk about the UAE in the context of energy and or regional security in the Middle East. So, what is their play here in an AI alliance?
Well, the UAE has been pivoting hard towards becoming a global technology node. They have massive capital reserves and they are building data center infrastructure at a rate that few other nations can match. By bringing them into Pax Silica, the US is trying to ensure that this capital and infrastructure aligns with Western standards rather than Chinese ones. So it's a smart move here. But again, the UAE, much like India, plays all sides. They have deep ties with Huawei. It's the Chinese tech company. Just because they signed the paper does not mean they are exclusive to the US sphere.
The only thing I'm learning from this episode is that the paper means nothing.
There's the title. The paper means nothing.
Paper means nothing. They sign all these agreements and they just go do whatever they want, anyways. It seems like Pax Silica is less of a fortress and more of a very complicated construction site with half the architects arguing over the blueprints.
Yeah, that is a fair analogy. The indicators we need to watch, though, are not the press releases, not the paper. We need to watch the regulatory bodies in Tokyo and The Hague. If we start seeing them push back publicly against U.S. export controls, we will know the alliance is in trouble.
Well, we will certainly keep an eye on those indicators. It is rare that supply chain logistics fill this high stakes, but here we are. When you step back and look at everything we've covered today, the underlying theme is undeniable, which is what is it, Curvin? The paper means nothing. We are witnessing a shift from managing the world to defending the fortress. And looking at the map today, it certainly feels like the board has been reset. But before we sign off, is there anything else you'd like to discuss?
Yes, before we sign off, we are closely tracking the developing situation in Palmyra, Syria. I'm sure everyone has seen it or heard it on the news. There's a fatal ambush that resulted in the deaths of 2 U.S. soldiers and a U.S. civilian interpreter. There's also injuries to 3 other service members. Now, as the fog of war clears and we get definitive confirmation on the attacker's identity and the broader geopolitical consequences, we are going to bring you a comprehensive deep dive in our next episode.
Thank you so much for listening to This Week Explained. We hope that you found it both informative and engaging. If you have any feedback or suggestions for future episodes, we'd love to hear from you. For more in-depth coverage of these stories and more, be sure to follow us on social media at This Week Explained.
Tiana, thank you so much. And until next week, stay safe out there.